1. The unexpected key that unlocks divine intervention. You've prayed, you've begged, you've tried to clean up your life, but heaven still feels silent. What if I told you there's one tiny, overlooked act that can make God move on your behalf even when you're at your worst? Not because you earned it, not because you're perfect, but because this one thing changes everything in how heaven responds to you. And the craziest part? It's not some dramatic spiritual gesture. It's so simple you'll wonder why you haven't been doing it all along. Let's cut to the chase. That one act is radical honesty with God, not the polished, churchy prayers we're used to. I'm talking about raw, unfiltered, ugly cry transparency. The kind where you stop telling God what you think He wants to hear and start telling Him what's actually in your heart. See, most of us pray like we're applying for a loan, dressing up our words, hiding our mess, trying to look qualified for blessing. But God isn't impressed by performances. He's moved by authenticity. Think about the most shocking moments in Scripture. David screaming at God in the Psalms, Job cursing the day he was born, Elijah collapsing under a tree and begging to die. These weren't model prayers. They were messy and chaotic, even disrespectful by religious standards. Yet those were the prayers that got heaven's attention. Why? Because God would rather you yell at Him in anger than lie to Him in piety. Here's the truth you need to hear today. God isn't waiting for you to get holy enough to help you. He's waiting for you to stop pretending. That secret addiction you're ashamed of? Name it. That rage boiling inside you? Spill it. That dream so big you're afraid to speak it? Whisper it. When you bring God the real you, not the Sunday school version, you trigger a spiritual law most believers ignore. Brokenness bypasses merit. The tax collector who couldn't even lift his eyes to heaven went home justified, while the Pharisee with his flawless prayer got nothing. The woman caught in adultery walked free, while the religious leaders walked away empty-handed. Your honesty is a key that unlocks what your goodness could never earn. So here's your challenge. For the next 24 hours, pray dangerously honest. No filters, no spiritual jargon, just the unfiltered truth. Tell God exactly how you feel, even if it's ugly. Admit what you've been too scared to say out loud. Watch what happens when you stop negotiating with heaven and start wrestling with it. That's the moment everything changes. 2. The surprising power of unworthy prayers. You've been taught your whole life that God only responds to the righteous, the faithful, the ones who have it all together. But what if the exact opposite is true? What if your unworthiness is actually the secret weapon that pulls heaven into your situation? Sounds crazy, right? But stick with me, because this one truth could shatter every religious barrier you've ever built between you and God's intervention. Let's rip the Band-Aid off. You don't have to deserve a miracle to get one. In fact, some of the most jaw-dropping acts of God in Scripture happened to people who were actively failing. Moses was a murderer on the run when God showed up in a burning bush. Rahab was a prostitute when she saved Israel's spies. Peter denied Jesus 3 times, and that's the man Christ chose to build His church. The common thread? Not perfection, but desperation. See, religion teaches us to clean ourselves up before we approach God, but grace operates on a different system entirely. Grace isn't a reward for the worthy. It's a rescue mission for the broken. And the moment you stop trying to qualify for help and start admitting you're helpless, you activate a divine response no amount of good behavior could ever trigger. Here's the part we rarely talk about. Your weakness isn't a liability. It's the entry point for God's power. Paul begged God to remove his weakness, and heaven's reply was shocking. My power is made perfect in weakness. Not despite your weakness. Not after you overcome it. In it, right there. In the middle of the mess you can't fix, the addiction you can't kick, the failure you can't undo. That's where God's strength shows up most dramatically. So why do we keep hiding our struggles? As if God doesn't already see them? Why polish our prayers to sound more faithful when what we're really feeling is doubt, fear, or exhaustion? The religious crowd will tell you to fake it till you make it. But God's economy works backwards. You have to fall apart to be lifted up. This changes everything. It means your prayers don't need to sound spiritual to be spiritual. It means you can come to God exactly as you are, not as you wish you were. And most importantly, it means the very thing you've been ashamed of, your inadequacy. is the exact thing that positions you for a miracle. So the next time you pray, try this. Lead with your weakness. Lead with your failure. Lead with the parts of your story you'd never post on social media. That's the raw material heaven loves to work with. Because when you stop pretending you're strong, you finally make room for God to be strong for you. 3. The counterintuitive prayer that forces heaven's hand. You're about to discover a prayer so shocking, so contrary to human instinct, that it flips the script on everything you've been taught about getting God's attention. It's not a prayer of begging, not a prayer of bargaining, not even a prayer of faith in the traditional sense. It's something far more powerful, something Jesus himself modeled in his darkest hour, and something 99% of believers never think to try. This prayer has 3 words that tear down the wall between heaven's resources and your impossible situation. 3 words that force a divine response even when every circumstance screams hopeless. Those words, "Yet not my will." You probably missed the nuclear power in that phrase because it sounds like surrender, but it's actually a spiritual weapon. See, most of us pray like this: God, give me what I want and I'll trust you. Jesus prayed the opposite. I trust you even if you don't give me what I want. That tiny shift changes everything. When you stop demanding that God align with your plans and instead surrender to his, you unlock a supernatural favor that cannot be stopped. Here's why this works when nothing else does. God isn't moved by our certainty. He's moved by our surrender. The widow who pestered the unjust judge got justice because she refused to quit. The Canaanite woman who accepted being called a dog got her miracle because she embraced humiliation. These people didn't get answers because they had perfect faith. They got answers because they had relentless surrender. They wanted God's presence more than his presence. And that's the secret most miss. We think God withholds to punish us, when in reality, he's waiting for us to want him more than we want the breakthrough. So, how do you pray this in real life? When you're staring at a diagnosis, a divorce paper, a bankruptcy notice, you say, God, I'm asking for healing, yet not my will. I'm begging for restoration, yet not my will. I need this financial miracle, yet not my will. That's not weakness. That's war. That prayer doesn't just move mountains. It moves the heart of God. Because when he sees you're not just coming for what he can do, but for who he is, every force in hell can't stop him from stepping into your situation. 4. The divine trigger. How one moment of brutal honesty forces heaven's hand. You know that split second when you're so desperate, so out of options, that you finally stop performing and just break? That moment, the one you're ashamed of, the one you try to hide, is exactly where God has been waiting to meet you all along. There's something about hitting rock bottom that cuts through the religious noise and forces a divine response. Not because you've earned it, but because you've finally gotten out of the way. Think about the thief on the cross. No time for good deeds. No chance to clean up his life. Just raw, unfiltered honesty. We deserve this, but he doesn't. That was it. No eloquence. No theology degree. Just a dying man's last-ditch admission of his own failure. It was enough to rewrite eternity for him. Meanwhile, the religious leaders who memorized scripture and kept every law got nothing. Why? Because desperation bypasses bureaucracy. When you reach the point of, I can't fix this, you activate heaven's emergency response system. This is why your darkest moments often precede your greatest breakthroughs. Jacob wrestled with God and walked away limping, but also blessed. The prodigal son had to end up eating pig food before he remembered his father's house. You'll never fully experience God as your rescuer until you stop pretending you don't need rescuing. So here's the uncomfortable truth. If your prayers haven't been working, maybe it's because they're still too polished. Maybe what you're calling faith is really just dressed up control. Real miracles begin where your self-sufficiency ends. The prayer that changes everything isn't God, help me. It's God, I'm helpless. That's the admission heaven can't ignore. When you stop negotiating and start surrendering, you don't just get answers, you get him. And once you have him, everything else becomes secondary. 5. The secret surrender. What happens when you stop begging and start trusting? You've prayed until your knees hurt. You've claimed every promise. You've done everything right. But what if the missing ingredient isn't more effort, but less? What if the key to unlocking your miracle isn't another desperate plea, but a single act of surrender so counterintuitive it feels like giving up? This is where faith gets uncomfortable. We love the stories of relentless pursuit, Jacob wrestling all night, the persistent widow banging on the judge's door. But we skip the part where real breakthrough comes not from trying harder, but from letting go. The moment Jesus raised Lazarus wasn't when Martha made her theological declaration. It was when they rolled away the stone, surrendering to a command that made no sense. The widow's oil multiplied only after she stopped clinging to her last drops and poured them out. Every miracle has this tipping point, where human effort ends and divine power begins. Here's what no one tells you. Your white-knuckle grip on the outcome might be what's blocking it. When you demand God work on your terms, you're not exercising faith, you're giving orders. True surrender says, I trust you enough to release my timeline, my methods, even my desired outcome. That's not defeat. That's the highest form of spiritual warfare. It's declaring that God's wisdom outweighs your understanding. So, how do you practically surrender when your world's collapsing? Try this. Replace God. Change my circumstances with God. Change me in these circumstances. Shift from give me what I want to make me who you want. That prayer, the one that seeks the giver more than the gift, is the spiritual equivalent of rolling away the stone. It creates space for resurrection power to move. The paradox? The moment you stop treating God like a vending machine and start embracing Him as Lord, you'll find your prayers answered in ways you couldn't manipulate or imagine. Not because you finally got the formula right, but because you finally got Him.